Welcome to bulking episode number 12. Today we're going to be walking through all of my 1 rep maxes. So without further ado, go ahead and roll the intro. And before we get started, please be sure to comment, like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. If you enjoyed today's content, it would be much appreciated. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. Before I got started on this challenge, I went ahead and measured myself and made sure I got my weight and height. As you can see, I'm weighing in at about 180 pounds and my height was sitting somewhere between 5'9" and 5'10". However, I will say that as far as my weight goes, I'm probably not actually 180 pounds waking up. This was about halfway through the day, about 11:30 a.m., so I had a couple meals by the time I took my measurements. For this challenge, I went ahead and did 1 rep maxes for squat, bench, and deadlift, in that order. Quick disclaimer, don't attempt any PRs without a spotter around. In my case, I do have safety pins on my squat rack. That does make a difference, but of course, I was making sure that I was doing everything as safe as possible and only going to weights that I knew wouldn't trap me underneath of the bar. With the measurements out of the way, I went ahead and got into the garage and started getting to work. Alright, we are testing our 1 rep maxes today. I'm going to start off with my warm-up sets. First one's going to be 135. I'm going to jump straight to 225, and then we'll do 315. I won't be filming between those because I feel like warm-up sets should just move pretty quickly. They're just that, warm-up sets. So let's get to it. I almost forgot to mention I'm only going to be doing about 3, maybe 4 reps per set, so keeping the rep range very low. And as I start to work up the weight, I'll just be doing 1 rep so that way I'm not burning or, utilizing more energy than I need to. Alright, so I just did 135, 225, and 315, all raw reps. Now we're going to go ahead and start putting on knee sleeves, getting our lifting shoes, as well as some wrist straps. The wrist straps are pretty important just because sometimes whenever you're squatting, your wrists will start to collapse. I do a low bar squat, so having them, sturdy and solidified makes a difference for me personally, but it could just be mental. So I'm going to go ahead, get the equipment on, and we're going to start pushing some weight. Starting with squats, I went ahead and got warmed up, going for 135, 225, and 315 pounds. Now my warm-ups for those sets were sitting about 2 to 4 reps per set. With the warm-ups out of the way, there was nothing left to do besides jumping right in. So for my first set, I went for an attempt on 345 since this is a weight that I know I can do for multiple reps, typically around 4 reps per set. Alright, with the equipment on, we're going to go ahead and jump up to 345. We're just going to do it for 1, get used to the load being on, my shoulders and getting kind of familiar again with having a heavier weight on my back. I've done 345 for a few reps on 2 separate sets, so I know that I can do the weight. It's more or less just kind of ramping up slowly to what my max weight will be. Since that felt good and pretty manageable, I jumped up to 365, and this is where you'll start to see the equipment start to play a factor in my lifts, as you'll see here. .365 moved really well, so I'm happy with that. We're going to go ahead and move up to 385, and this would tie my PR inside of an actual powerlifting competition. So we're going to see how it moves after a couple of minutes of rest, and hopefully it moves pretty well. I'd like to see if I can at least attempt a 405 squat, but I think 395 is very realistic for today. After hitting 365, I felt like the depth was good. I'm only going for about 90 degrees here, not going ass to grass, so I jumped up to 385 to see how that felt. As you can see, I was able to get it up pretty easy. 385 moved very well. I'm pretty happy about that. Felt heavy coming off the bar, or off the rack, but overall, I'm pleased. So we're gonna go ahead and do 395 now and see how that goes. You can tell that as I'm getting deeper into this, I'm slowly tapering off the weight. So initially it might be like 20 pounds added onto the bar. Then it'll slowly go down to 5, and we'll just move in 5-pound increments to see how heavy I can actually go. Now, it wasn't super difficult, but I will admit that 385 is pretty heavy for me, so I slowly moved up to 395. This would be the heaviest weight outside of a competition that I've ever hit in my life. I've only hit it one time for 1 rep, so even though I was feeling pretty confident, it was still, you know, a challenging weight for me previously. After 395 went up, I was feeling pretty good. So I decided to attempt a lifetime squat PR. For me, I've always wanted to hit 405 on squat. I felt like if you were really a lifter, you were able to hit 405. Now don't get me wrong, if you haven't hit 405 before, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's taken me years of practice and diligence just to get to that point of even attempting the squat. So take a look here at how that went for me. All right, 395 went up pretty well. Like, I'm happy with the way that that moved, the depth that I got, and all of that. So I'm gonna try 405. This is kind of a lifetime goal of mine, so it's a little bit risky because it is a big jump, but I don't know, I'm just feeling good today, and I wanna see if I can do it. Now, I don't recommend anybody do this without a spotter, but because I do have the safety pins, I'm gonna really rely on those. If it doesn't feel comfortable, I'm gonna try to push the bar back off of my back and onto the pins. That way, I can bail out. So let's see how it goes. As you can see, it went pretty well. I was able to get down to about 90 degrees and the weight moved pretty decently. I feel like I might have been able to do a little bit more, but like I said before, I'm not trying to end up getting caught underneath the bar, so I stuck with 405 for my final lift. For me, this is a huge deal. It really is a big PR for me. I've been, you know, manifesting this for a very long time. I always knew I could get there, but I never quite got there. So I'm pretty proud of myself for being able to not just hit 405, but set a PR on a day, you know, towards the end of the bulk. All right, there goes 405. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty excited about that. So excited that I'm stuttering. That felt good, and I feel like I probably could go up weight, but because I don't have a spotter here, and I'm kind of just alone in my garage, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to bench. I wanna make sure that, you know, I'm able to avoid injury doing all of this and keep pushing to the next marker. So I can finally knock that off my bucket list and continue to move up. Squat out of the way, I went over to bench press. And the reason I'm doing this order is because this is the typical order you'll have for something like a powerlifting competition, and it makes the most sense. Just like with squats, I went ahead and did my warm-up weights with essentially no rest in between. Started off with 135 pounds and moved up to 225 pounds for about 2 to 4 reps for each set. With that out of the way, I decided to attempt for my first, you know, bigger lift, 245 pound bench press, and this would be a pause rep. So I came down, paused for about a second, made sure there was no momentum, and then pressed. All right, the warm-ups felt good. We're gonna move over to 245. Try to keep a pause rep on this one, and then we'll slowly work up from there. So let's get to it. And as you can see, it went pretty well. This is a weight that I've done a bunch of times, so I wasn't too worried about it, given the fact that I'm feeling pretty strong, you know, being on the bulk and constantly being in a calorie surplus. With that out of the way, I went ahead for 255. Again, this is a weight that I know I can do with a pause rep even, so I was feeling pretty good about being able to lift it up. 245 felt very good, so we're gonna go ahead and do 255. I usually do this at the end of a heavy, working set of 6 sets. But because I'm doing so many less sets this time, and I just feel like I have more energy right now than I normally would, I think I'm gonna try and attempt it as a pause rep so we can see how well it moves. As you can see, I was able to do so. That felt pretty good. I don't know how long the pause was, but it definitely sat on my chest for about a half a second. So I'm gonna count that. Felt pretty good. Kind of in a tough situation now. I can try 265 for a pause rep, or I can just jump straight to 275. But with that said, I did have a decision to make whether I would do 265, which is the most I've ever done in a competition, or 275 and hit a PR. And since 255 went up pretty well, I decided to jump to 275. Mostly because I was feeling good that day, and feeling good going into a PR can make a big difference, especially whenever you're practicing pause reps. However, this is a weight that I've failed in the past on a pause rep in a powerlifting competition, so it was a bit of a risk. However, as you can see, I was able to get 275 up with a slight pause, and I was feeling pretty good about that. That's a relatively heavy weight. It's the most I've ever done on bench, and it's definitely the most I've ever done on bench with a pause. It wasn't a super long pause, but it was a pause nonetheless. Of course, make no mistake, it was a grind of a rep. There was some teeter-tottering going on just a little bit throughout the rep. Here's my raw reaction to that. All right, so I just watched it back. Honestly, I'm happy with that. I know I teeter-tottered a little bit towards the middle of the rep, but that was a grind. I fought through it, and I've never done 275 on a pause rep. And I felt like the pause on that was actually pretty good. So I'm gonna probably stop it here. You know what you're thinking? Sean, you could probably do more. But again, I don't have a spotter, so I wanna make sure that I'm doing all of this as safe as possible. With bench and squat out of the way, there's nothing left to do besides deadlifts. If you've been watching my progress throughout the past couple of months on this bulk, then you know that I've been able to manage to pull a couple of PRs on deadlift. So to kind of, practice my warm-ups, I was able to feel pretty confident going for 135, 225, and 315, simply as warm-ups, no real rest, and kind of just going from one set to the next. Because of my previous, successes with PRs on deadlift, instead of jumping to 365, I just went straight for 405 to kind of, keep some of that energy expenditure that I would typically have working my way up to 405 and then any weight after that. All right, no surprises here. That was 135, 225, and 315. Just getting a, 2 to 4 rep range knocked out for all of those weights as a warm-up. Now we're gonna do 405, crush that, and then slowly move up from there. And as you can see, it was a successful rep, so I felt pretty good about that. It really wasn't too much of a grind. Now, if you've been following this channel for a little bit, then you know a year ago I tried a similar challenge to this to test my 1 rep maxes, and I did attempt 425. It didn't go great. I really wasn't even able to get the weight off of the ground. So I was trying it again, but I have hit 425 for a number of times throughout this bulk, and I was feeling pretty good about it. 405 moved pretty well. It's a little bit slow, but I'm not complaining. We're gonna go ahead and move up to 425. That was the plate that you just saw me add on here with an extra 10 on each side. So let's see how it goes. As you can see, I was able to successfully pull 425, and I was feeling pretty good about that. So my next challenge was to determine what the next weight would be. If you haven't had a chance to keep up with my shorts, then you may not know that I actually hit a new PR about 5 days before attempting this challenge of 455 pounds, as you can see on the clip here. And it went okay, but I'm not gonna lie, it was a bit of a grind. You can see my, central nervous system starting to tweak out a little bit, and I wanted to see if I was able to muster the strength to pull a nice clean rep. All right, admittedly that didn't move as well as I had hoped, but with that said, I do have a new PR that I just posted a couple of weeks ago, or I believe it was last week. It was probably a couple of weeks ago by the time this video drops, but point being, I'm gonna jump to 455, that's my lifetime PR. We're gonna try to re-emulate that, see if it works, and hopefully knock that out and gather our total after all of this. So this is how 455 went on this day. Well, that was some ass, so definitely not pulling that today. Fortunately, I've done it before, but unfortunately it wasn't a clean rep. So we're just gonna put my total deadlift PR at 425 for right now, even though I know I can do better. I know I can do 445. 455 was a struggle. So let's go ahead and add our totals and see where we're at. Overall, I probably shouldn't have attempted to do 455 a few days before, and maybe should have saved it for this challenge, but the day that I did pull it, I just felt really good, like I was pulling weight, and it was something that I've wanted to do for a while, and going into this specific lift on this day was pretty difficult. I mean, my setup I think was way too quick, and I think if I would have taken a little bit more time in between sets, instead of maybe 3 minutes going up to 5, it might have played out differently. Instead, unfortunately, my form broke down pretty quick. As you can see, my back ended up kind of bowing right away, and from my raw reaction afterwards, you can tell I was pretty disappointed. However, I can't complain too much because throughout the last 3 months, nearly 3 months, I managed to, set different PRs and big 3 lifts. So despite failing 455, I will say that, I've definitely managed to get a lot stronger on the bulk. Last year, whenever I attempted to do this, my total weight for, the big 3 combined was 1045. That was 385 on squat, 255 on bench, and 405 on deadlift. In this video alone, I was able to pull 1105. That's a huge jump for me. And that doesn't include the 455 that I've done previously. That's strictly just the 405 squat, 275 bench with a pause, as well as a 425 deadlift. While I don't think everyone should bulk, I do think that if you're relatively lean and you're starting to become a little bit stagnant with your lifts, it's a good idea to attempt the bulk even a little bit to see if you can kind of break some of those strength plateaus. I think you'd be surprised by the progress that can be made over the course of a 90-day period. For me, it's done a lot, and I've almost increased my total weight combining those 3 lifts by nearly 100 pounds, if you include the 455. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you made it this far, just know that I appreciate you. You're probably in the top 1% of my viewers, and that means something. So with all of that said, I'm going to end the video here, and until next time, keep it together.